After losing her memory, Willow fell in love with me. We were together for 3 years, a couple admired by everyone, as if blessed by fate itself. However, on our wedding day, she suddenly regained her memories from before the accident. Right there and then, she ran off with her ex-boyfriend. Half an hour later, I received a text message from her. 3 years of amnesia. I owe him too much. Give me a few nights to make it up to him, and we can hold the wedding again next time. I was utterly stunned, standing before a hall full of shocked family and friends. I announced the wedding was cancelled. There is no more time, Willow, and there will be no next time. Chapter 1. The abrupt cancellation of the wedding threw the entire venue into chaos. While I was busy calming my trembling, enraged parents, our friends and relatives began to leave one by one, leaving behind an empty, disheveled banquet hall. Mr. and Mrs. Liu, Willow's parents, wore expressions of deep apology. They clung to me, repeatedly saying, "George, this happened so suddenly. We had no idea she would regain her memories today. Don't worry, we'll set her straight when we get back, and you can reschedule the wedding." I shook my head expressionlessly, the words of refusal still on my tongue. When a disdainful chuckle came from behind me, a voice spoke. "I told you a long time ago. My sister has always loved Makoto. If it hadn't been for the car accident that made her forget him, she wouldn't have been with you in the first place. And now that she's regained her memories, of course she'll want to get back with Makoto. Stop dreaming about marrying her." Hearing this, my whole body froze for a moment. My heart clenched as though gripped tightly by an invisible hand. The speaker was Mary, Willow's younger sister. She had never liked me. For a long time, I didn't know why. It wasn't until I learned that Makoto was her most admired senior that I understood the reason. Mr. Liu shot his daughter a fierce glare, signaling her to keep quiet, but Mary ignored his warning. She sneered coldly and continued, "In my sister's heart, Makoto will always come first. You're nothing to her now." My parents' faces grew darker and darker, while I remained silent, quietly enduring the dull spreading through my chest. 3 years ago, after Willow's car accident and subsequent memory loss, Makoto mysteriously vanished. It was through our parents' arrangement that Willow and I met. Our compatible personalities and the natural pull of our souls quickly brought us together. During the time we spent as a couple, we created countless beautiful memories. Yet, at this moment, they were all shattered. Only now did I realize that a first love is irreplaceable. While a simp can be anyone, in Willow's heart, her first love was Makoto, and I was just the replaceable simp. After everyone had left, I returned home alone. The marital home, every bit of it, from the decor to the furniture, from the ornaments to the tiniest details, was something Willow and I had painstakingly chosen together. Every small object bore a story, a vivid memory of sweet moments. These memories haunted me, refusing to fade from my mind. As night fell, the dusky sky seemed like a massive, invisible net, smothering me. With each passing moment, the darkness deepened, and my heart grew colder. It wasn't until the sound of the door unlocking broke the stillness that I snapped out of my daze. It was Willow. She had come back. She spoke softly. "Darling, this is your favorite camera model. I spent all day looking for it." Willow placed the gift box on the table and pushed it toward me, her tone tinged with guilt. "I'm sorry," she said. I looked at the gift in front of me. It was the anniversary edition, a detail that showed how much effort she'd put into it. In the past, I might have been thrilled, but now, it brought me no joy. What was the point of this kind of atonement? I sighed, about to say something, when her next words hit me like a bucket of cold water. "But what happened at the wedding has nothing to do with Makoto," she said. "I hope you won't make things difficult for him." Hearing Makoto's name brought a dull ache to my chest. She continued, "George, I hope you'll withdraw from the City's jewelry design competition. I froze, staring at her in confusion. My gaze was full of questions. Withdraw. I asked. She said, Makoto has been preparing for this competition for over a year and has poured so much effort into it. I heard that among all the participants, only your skills surpass his. The jewelry design competition was a prestigious event for the world's top jewelry designers. Winning the gold prize meant earning the permanent design rights for global luxury brands. I'd heard that Makoto had started his own private jewelry studio, but I didn't expect his ambitions to be this big. So what? I interrupted, leaning in to meet her gaze, anger seeping into my voice. So you want me to drop out of the competition and hand the first-place trophy to him? Guilt flickered in Willow's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by another emotion. She said, Makoto had a miserable 3 years while I was suffering from amnesia. We owe him. It's just one competition. Why can't you let him have it? Every word she spoke reeked of entitlement. She kept saying I owed Makoto, that I had to make it up to him. What a joke. We had been in love for 3 years, and she knew exactly how much time and effort I had poured into this competition, far more than Makoto ever could. Yet here she was, asking me to step aside just to increase his chances of winning. How could she be so disgusting? The dull ache in my chest turned into a sharp, twisting blade, cutting deeper and deeper, until I could hardly breathe. Willow anxiously awaited my response. When I stayed silent, she reached out to pinch my hand playfully and said, George, I know you really want to participate in the competition, but your family is wealthy and privileged. You have so many opportunities. Just give this one to Makoto. Okay. She didn't know a thing. Just because my background was better than Makoto's. Just because I was more accomplished. I had to willingly let him win. The frustration boiling inside me erupted all at once. My jaw tightened, and when I looked at her again, my eyes were filled with cold resolve. In your dreams, I won't drop out, I said firmly. If he wants to win first place, he'll have to earn it with his own skills. I'm not giving him anything. Willow froze, clearly unprepared for my blunt refusal. Her tone quickly turned icy. George, how did you become so selfish and heartless? You already have everything. Why are you competing with him over this small thing? If it hadn't been for the accident 3 years ago that made me lose my memory, I wouldn't have forgotten him or ended up with you. What I'm doing now is just trying to make up for that. Can't you be more understanding? No. The word exploded out of me, loud and sharp, anger lacing my voice in a way that surprised even me. My eyes reddened as I stared at her, pointing a finger at her face, spitting out each word. The one who feels indebted to him is you. This has nothing to do with me. The room fell into a suffocating silence, as if the air had frozen. After my final words, I didn't look at her again. I stood up and went to my room. The sound of the door slamming was deafening in the stillness of the night, like a heavy barrier slamming down between us. My heart, struggling desperately to stay alive, finally went cold. The day after that argument, Willow moved out. She left me a message saying she needed time to sort out her feelings for Makoto and that we could proceed with the wedding once she had everything figured out. She asked me to understand. I stared at her message for a long time, until my eyes burned and turned red. Only then did I snap back to reality. There was no point in replying to something so impossible. Suppressing all my emotions, I threw myself into preparing for the jewelry design competition with everything I had. This was the dream I had been working toward for my entire life, and I wasn't going to give it up just because of Willow's ridiculous request. In fact, it gave me even more determination to win. As for Willow, it was as if she had vanished from my world entirely. Chapter 2. Perhaps driven by resentment or some twisted curiosity, I found myself scrolling through Makoto's Twitter late at night, alone in the silence. Ever since Willow regained her memory, his updates had become frequent, almost obsessively so, one post every few hours. On the day Willow ran out of our wedding to be with him, he shared a photo of a bride's silhouette, hands tightly clasped together with his. The caption read, "Thank you, heavens, for bringing her back to me. You were destined to be my bride." As he prepared his entry for the design competition, Willow spent all day in his study, gathering materials and brainstorming ideas for him. He posted a photo of her, asleep on his lap, with the caption, "No matter the time or place, you're always by my side. I'm so lucky to have you." They went bungee jumping in the mountains, explored the wilderness on survival trips, rode the wildest roller coasters, and braved freefall tower rides. The Willow in those photos was someone I had never known. So this was who she truly was. 3 years ago, for the first time, she felt like a stranger to me, someone I had never truly met. I read every single post, every comment, letting the words stab deeper and deeper into my chest until I was left raw and bleeding. Only then did I realize how agonizing and painful it is to try to cut someone completely out of your heart. Half a month later, the day of the design competition arrived. The format was simple, no preliminary rounds, no finals, just one decisive showdown. Most of the participants had poured their life's work into creating masterpieces for this event. Makoto was no exception, and neither was I. As soon as I entered the venue, I spotted the dazzling couple in the crowd. Willow had shed her usual, elegant dresses in favor of a bold, avant-garde outfit that matched Makoto's edgy style perfectly. From afar, they looked like the ideal, inseparable couple. Even though I had mentally prepared myself for this moment, I had to admit, seeing them hand in hand, so close, made it hard to breathe. I turned my head away, forcing myself to ignore their presence. But someone wasn't about to let me off so easily. "Mr. Wong." "Hello. I'm Makoto." His voice came out smooth and confident as he extended a hand toward me. A faint smile played on his lips. Makoto was the picture of a charming, free-spirited man in his leather jacket, exuding an aura of untamed boldness. In stark contrast, I stood stiffly in my tailored suit, composed yet overly serious. It was clear Makoto and I were complete opposites. So this was the kind of man Willow had liked 3 years ago. I glanced briefly at Willow, who had followed him over, then shifted my gaze to his outstretched hand. I returned a quick handshake and said curtly, "Hello." It had been days since I last saw Willow, and she had changed. Thick eyeliner and a smoky eyeshadow now accentuated her features. She looked even bolder than she did in the photos. Makoto, noticing my lingering gaze, raised an eyebrow and said, "Before she lost her memory, Willow loved being free-spirited and bold like this. This is the real her, Mr. Wong. I bet you've never seen this side of her before." He was flaunting her, as if she were his prized creation, and his words dripped with mockery. I didn't respond, but in the shadow of Willow's furrowed brows, I caught a fleeting emotion, something like reluctance or longing. Makoto noticed too. His face darkened as he stepped in front of Willow, cutting off her line of sight. "Mr. Wong," he said, changing the subject, "I hear you've made a name for yourself in the design world, but the competition is fierce this time, so you'd better be prepared." Designers had come from all over the world, but I wasn't intimidated. I had confidence in my abilities. Makoto, private studio designer, with few notable works to his name, exuded an unshakable confidence. I couldn't help but admire how he carried himself as if victory was already his. The competition began with transparency. Each designer presented their sketches and explained their concepts to the judges. The scores would be given by global design masters and brand representatives, and the highest score would win. My turn came immediately after Makoto's, when he stepped on stage. He shot me a look, a mix of arrogance and disdain, as if to say the win was already his. I wasn't fazed. Inwardly, I even smirked, but that composure crumbled the moment his designs appeared on the screen. His work was identical to mine. Every detail, every precision-crafted element, every piece of conceptual thinking, it was all a carbon copy of my design. How had he gotten hold of my sketches? I scanned the audience until my eyes landed on Willow. She avoided my gaze, shifting uncomfortably in her seat. My chest tightened. I hadn't changed the locks on our home, and the password on my computer was still her birthday. I had never guarded against her, and she had stabbed me in the back. But of course, Makoto's place in her heart was untouchable. Though I understood this, seeing it play out in front of me shattered something inside. When I snapped out of my daze, the room was filled with thunderous applause. Makoto had received the highest score so far, 96. Victory seemed certain. The host called for the next participant. I walked onto the stage, my gaze meeting Makoto's smug expression. Then I spoke. My design is identical to the previous participants. A stunned silence fell over the room as everyone turned to me, their faces filled with disbelief. Makoto laughed derisively. Mr. Wong, excellent taste. Out of all the designs here, you chose mine to copy. But really, if you're going to plagiarize, at least put some effort into it. Even the details and concepts are identical. He was outright accusing me, painting himself as the victim. I glanced briefly at him, then let my gaze linger on Willow for 3 long seconds. Finally, I suppressed all emotion, smirking coldly as I said, "Plagiarism is indeed despicable. I have no intention of wasting the judge's time to determine who copied whom. Let's resolve this quickly." I pulled a spare USB drive from my pocket and plugged it into the computer. The moment the new version of my design appeared on the big screen, the room was filled with gasps and whispers of surprise. I calmly spoke. "So, I decided to enter with this version of my design." Makoto's face instantly turned pale. The design I had submitted was one I had worked on during my spare time, and it wasn't saved on the computer at home, so Willow had never seen it. The result was undeniable. My design received the highest score of 98.6, and I was crowned the winner. After delivering my presentation, explaining every aspect of the design process and my concept, no one could question the originality of my work anymore. All eyes shifted from admiration of Makoto's design to suspicion, and then to anger, without any need for solid proof. His plagiarism was already assumed, and he was disqualified from the competition. His rank was erased, and he was banned from representing himself or his studio in future contests. In just a few hours, the results had turned from victory to ruin. As I stood on the stage, receiving the award and posing for pictures, I noticed Willow standing far below in the crowd. Her eyes sparkled with a mix of joy, guilt, and perhaps relief. But Makoto had long since disappeared. After the ceremony, Willow came to find me in the backstage lounge. "George, congratulations," she said, her voice softer than usual. I lowered my gaze, focusing on the bouquet of sunflowers she was holding. She had once told me she was my biggest fan, and that when I won, she would give me a bouquet of sunflowers. She remembered that, but I wondered if she remembered how much I despised betrayal. The bouquet was large and heavy. She held it up for so long that her arm started to tremble, but I still didn't take it. Willow's eyes reddened with frustration, and she pushed the flowers forward again. "I was wrong to take your design without your permission, George. I admit it." Then, in a softer voice, she added, "But can you help me? Can you explain to them that Makoto didn't mean to steal your design? He didn't do it on purpose. If he's labeled as a plagiarist, his life will be ruined." Ruined. The chill in my chest grew more intense as I looked at her. my eyes full of coldness. I smiled sarcastically. Did you ever consider that if I didn't have a backup design to clear my name, the one accused of plagiarism would be me? The one whose life would be ruined would be me. Willow froze, her face turning pale. She couldn't even bring herself to look me in the eye anymore. Her whole demeanor collapsed as she weakly whispered, "I'm sorry, but I didn't want to hear it." The flowers were still forced into my arms. At that moment, Makoto appeared, rushing over and pulling Willow into his embrace. He glared at me with protective fury. "You've already taken the first place. Now you want to steal Willow from me too. Now my reputation is ruined. Are you satisfied?" I smiled coldly and said, "Yes, I'm quite satisfied. Congratulations." He cursed loudly and charged at me. Before he could take another step, Willow quickly stepped between us, trying to stop him. "Makoto, please calm down. Let's think of another way. Don't do this. I'm upset too." Makoto's face was filled with resentment. He glared at her, muttering, "You've changed. Willow, you promised me you'd do anything to make up for this. How long has it been? And you already forgot what you said that night." That night. It must have been the night Willow stayed out after regaining her memory. The night that should have been our first night together as newlyweds. They really were together. A bitter laugh curled inside me. I caught Willow stealing a quick glance at me, her expression full of panic. She said, "It's not like that. Makoto, please calm down. We'll talk about this later." "Okay." She took a deep breath, hesitating for a moment, before she softly spoke to calm him. But Makoto wouldn't listen. He continued to insist. "So you're helping him and not me? Do you still love him?" Willow looked at me, her gaze conflicted, before falling silent. The silence between us was unbearable, and it seemed to snap something in Makoto. His eyes turned cold as he glared at me one last time before storming off, not even bothering to look back. Willow turned to me and said, "George, just give me a little more time. Once I comfort him, I'll come back to you. Will you wait for me?" She said it, but still turned and walked away, glancing back at me as she did. I called out, "No," but she didn't hear me. She was already gone. Chapter 3. I coldly watched the two figures in the distance, tangled in each other, as memories of the time I spent with Willow resurfaced. Back then, we got along so well, almost never fighting. Whenever we did, I was the first to apologize, always finding ways to make her happy. It seemed like, up until now, she had never gone to such lengths to win me over. Under the streetlights, their shadows shifted and finally embraced, their silhouettes elongated in the dim light. Perhaps it was the dry, late autumn air, but my eyes felt uncomfortably dry, and a sharp pain settled in my chest. I withdrew my gaze and tossed the sunflowers Willow had given me into the trash can. Since I had already decided to sever ties with Willow completely, I called her, asking her to come back so we could clear things up. She agreed, and I faintly heard Makoto's voice on the other end of the phone. He insisted on coming with her, to make sure she got to me safely. The rain poured down heavily. When Willow arrived, half of her shoulder was soaked. My gaze fell on her damp shoulder, and I found myself frozen for a moment. She noticed my stare and quickly looked at her shoulder, her brow furrowing. A nameless emotion flickered in her eyes. In the past, on every rainy day, I would always pick her up, holding an umbrella that was tilted towards her. After we got home, she would be completely dry, while my shoulder would always be soaked. But now, her shoulder was damp, too. Perhaps feeling embarrassed, Willow awkwardly explained, "Makoto's umbrella was probably a bit too small. It wasn't intentional." I had no interest in hearing her explanation. I only felt a sense of regret for myself. What had once been so genuine and passionate between us had now ended up like this. I pointed to the box on the table and said, "All your personal belongings have been packed. Check if you've missed anything." She hesitated, then looked at me, confused. "What do you mean?" I replied calmly. "Willow, since the day you ran away from our wedding, we've never been able to go back. Let's break up. From now on, you and I have no more ties." I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to ease the tension in my forehead that had been there for so long. She asked, "Break up?" She staggered back a step. Her eyes filled with disbelief as she said, "Is it because of Makoto?" "George, I've explained this to you before. I only feel guilty towards him now. I wanted to make up for the things I owe him because of my amnesia. Can't you understand? Please, just give me more time." Willow looked up at me, her eyes full of confusion, as if my cold attitude had hurt her. She appeared lost, uncertain, and even a little desperate. She seemed to think that because I loved her, I should understand and forgive all her actions. But why should I? After Willow ran away from our wedding, a friend of mine looked into her past relationship with Makoto. They had known each other since high school and had attended the same university. They were the top couple on campus at the time. 3 years ago, Makoto wanted to study abroad, but Willow opposed it. After their argument, she chased him to the airport, where she got into a car accident. The blood clot in her brain pressed against the surrounding nerves, causing her memory loss. Makoto, despite hearing about the accident, didn't return from abroad. The Liu family had always disapproved of Makoto, so they conveniently never mentioned the past and pushed for Willow and me to be together. I had always been sincere about relationships. For me, love was something that belonged to two people. So when Willow and I got together, I never asked her about her past, and the Liu family never brought it up either. Makoto and I were entirely different people. He was cheerful, humorous, and carefree. He would sneak out of class with Willow, drink and party, and challenge all kinds of extreme sports. On the other hand, was reserved, gentle, and boring. If it were the Willow before her accident, she would never have fallen for someone like me. But now that she had regained her memory from 3 years ago, what did that mean for the past 3 years we had spent together? If I were to get into the details, I was just as much a victim of this entire mistake as she was. Why should I bear the brunt of this painful betrayal? At this moment, my heart, battered and broken, had turned to stone. No matter how heartbroken or sad she was, it no longer mattered to me. I turned away, moved the box to the door, and spoke in an indifferent, distant tone. "Ms. Liu, please leave. George, please don't kick me out." Willow began crying, shaking her head in pain. I still remained cold and expressionless. "Please leave. In the past, no matter what she did wrong, as long as she gave a sign of affection, I would easily forgive her and accept her. But not this time. I couldn't even bring myself to care about who was right or wrong. I simply couldn't love her anymore. Let me slowly, piece by piece, pull her out of my world." In the end, despite her unwillingness, Willow had no choice but to leave. I contacted a locksmith and had the locks on the doors replaced overnight. Without her, the house was still the same house. All the decorations and arrangements unchanged. But something was missing. The lights didn't seem as bright as before. The sofa wasn't as soft. And even the air I breathed felt faintly bitter, almost repulsive. I called for a cleaning service and spent half a day clearing out everything related to Willow, watching all the traces of the life we once shared being removed. The pain in my heart seemed to dissipate bit by bit, as if it was being cleared away along with the belongings. After 7 or 8 large boxes were hauled away, the house felt eerily empty. But for some reason, I felt lighter, as though the heavy burden weighing on my chest had suddenly been lifted. I blocked all of Willow's contact information. If we were going to end this, it had to be final. But she seemed to have lost her mind, desperately trying to reach me. When I woke up, I had more than a dozen missed calls from unfamiliar numbers. I chose one and returned the call. The call was quickly answered, and I heard her voice on the other end. George, did you block me? Why aren't you answering my calls? Her voice was trembling and hoarse, as if she had been crying. I didn't answer. I simply hung up. She called again, and I blocked her once more. A moment later, a new number appeared on my screen. Having spent 3 years with Willow, I knew her well. She seemed carefree on the surface, but deep down, she was stubborn and obsessive. She had always been like this. I didn't want to be harassed all day, so reluctantly, I answered the call. Willow, we've broken up. What do you want? She choked out. I don't agree to break up. Do you hear me? The words came out almost like a cry, the voice echoing in a large, empty space. When I didn't respond, she stubbornly continued. Why don't you answer my calls? Why? I replied calmly. There's no need for us to stay in touch anymore. I said it seriously. On the other end of the line, there was silence for a moment, followed by quiet sobs. After a long pause, she spoke again. Before, no matter how late it was, I could always find you. That was true. But that was before. For the 3 years we were together, I always kept my phone on, 24/7, ready to answer her calls and messages as soon as they came in. I had truly loved her with all my heart. I said, that was before. It won't be like that anymore. And with that, I hung up and blocked her number once more. After winning the jewelry design competition, the company quickly brought in over a dozen new projects, and I became thoroughly busy. Willow tried to contact me every day, but my secretary always kept her at the door, and I never saw her. One evening, just before the end of the workday, another unfamiliar call came in. I hesitated for a few seconds, but finally pressed the answer button. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar at first, but soon, I recognized it. It was Makoto. I glanced at my watch. It was still early, so I agreed to meet him. The cafe for the meeting was right beneath my office building. I remembered Willow used to love their caramel macchiatos, and we'd come here together often. The coffee still tasted the same, but everything had changed. I shifted my gaze from the cup to Makoto, who sat across from me. I asked, "Do you need something from me?" Makoto raised his eyes to look at me, his gaze slowly sweeping across my face. Perhaps he didn't get the reaction he wanted, because his expression flickered with disappointment. He spoke. "You've only known Willow for 3 years, while I've had over 8 years of relationship with her. You can't compare to me. The 3 years she lost due to amnesia, you took advantage of that time. But now that her memory is back, she'll surely end up marrying me." I stayed silent, patiently waiting for him to finish. After a brief pause, he continued, "You stole those 3 years from me. Now that I've returned, you should step aside and stop interfering with Willow." Took me a moment to realize that he had come to stake his claim and show his dominance. I slowly traced the rim of my coffee cup with my fingers, my expression calm, even amused, as I responded, "Mr. E, right? You don't need to worry. The day Willow ran away from our wedding, we already officially broke up. If you can, maybe you should persuade her to stop bothering me." Makoto's face turned pale with anger, as if he hadn't expected me to be so indifferent. He scolded, "You're a hypocrite. You keep saying you've broken up with Willow, but you act like you don't care at all. If you hadn't used some tricks, how could she still be obsessed with you? Don't think I don't know. You're all talk and no action. Completely fake." He suddenly seemed to lose his mind, shouting in frustration, his eyes red with anger as he hissed through clenched teeth, "George, Willow was mine before, and she will be mine again." I couldn't help but laugh at his words. The sound escaped before I could stop it. I said, "If you were with Willow when she had her car accident, she wouldn't have lost her memory and ended up with me. You talk about having over 8 years of history with her, so why are you afraid of me taking her from you?" I motioned toward the door with a slight nod. Why don't you ask her yourself? Does she still love you? Makoto, confused, turned to look in the direction I pointed. Willow was standing there, looking utterly lost. He asked, Willow, you used to love me the most. What about now? This question seemed to stun Willow, and she sank to the floor, her hands covering her face as she sobbed in a broken, muffled voice. I'm sorry. I'm not sure. Hearing her uncertain answer, Makoto completely lost control. He shouted, Not sure? How can you not be sure? He only stole those 3 years while you had amnesia. He's nothing but a thief. I'm your true love. You've only grown used to him. Now that we've reconciled, you'll forget about him soon. Willow remained silent, not saying a word. Her silence seemed to ignite Makoto's rage. He suddenly grabbed a water glass and threw it at my feet, yelling, Fine, fine. I've been foolish. I'm leaving. The glass shattered loudly on the floor, the sound drawing the attention of several people around us. After Makoto stormed out, I expected Willow to chase after him like last time. But this time, she didn't. Instead, she hurriedly asked the waiter for a cotton swab and iodine, gently cradling my hand and wiping the cut I hadn't noticed. It was then that I realized the glass had splintered and cut my hand, leaving a painful, bloody mark on my skin. I said, Thanks, but I don't need it. I coldly pulled my hand away, avoiding her gaze as I stood up and left. Willow's face was pale, her fragile body trembling slightly as she tried to steady herself. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, blinding her, causing tears to spill from her eyes. The memories of the 3 years we had shared together felt like a knife, repeatedly cutting into the raw nerves of her heart. Maybe, at this moment, she regretted it, but I didn't care about her feelings anymore. I wasn't the kind of person who would tie all my emotions to a single woman. I suppose the next time I saw Willow was a week later. Chapter 4. She was dressed in a blue hospital gown, probably sneaking out from the hospital. Even from a distance, a faint smell of alcohol wafted from her as the wind blew. After our last meeting, I heard that Makoto had a violent outburst with her. He even laid hands on her, causing the police to get involved. Because he hurt someone, Makoto was taken to the police station by the Liu family. He begged Willow to forgive him and help him, but all he received in return was a silent refusal. After that, Willow started drinking heavily every day, often getting so drunk that she was sent to the hospital for stomach pumping. Liu's mother called me, crying and begging me to check on her, but I refused. I looked at the person in front of me, frowning slightly, instinctively stepping back a step. There was no trace of sympathy in my eyes, as if the person before me was a complete stranger. George! Willow opened her mouth, gripping the hem of her clothes so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her long hair hung in disarray, and she looked like someone drowning, waiting for me to save her, helpless. But I remained unmoved, silently observing her. Her expression suddenly turned tender and serious. She said, George, I was wrong. I regret it. I used to think that forgetting Makoto during the 3 years of amnesia was the biggest hurt I could cause him, so I tried to make it up to him. But now I realize, the one I hurt the most is you. She paused for a moment, big tears already streaming down her face as she continued. If I hadn't run away from the wedding, we'd be so happy now. It's me who hurt you without thinking of the consequences. Can we start over? Let's have the wedding again. Like before. Please, let's try again. The last few words were almost choked out in a sob. Her tear-filled eyes were full of longing, like a vast, deep ocean. It seemed that if I wasn't careful, I would be drowned in it. If this had happened before, I might have already drowned in that sea of emotion. But I was no longer the person I used to be. Even though she was sobbing before me, looking so pitiful and making me feel some sympathy, my heart remained calm. I raised my head and met Willow's gaze. my voice cold as I said, "No. Our relationship was always a mistake. There's no need to try again." She shook her head desperately. "No, that's not true. We used to love each other so much. How can it have been a mistake?" I sneered and took another step back. Avoiding her touch, I said, "After your amnesia, you could have fallen for anyone. That person didn't necessarily have to be me. Just like I said before, you only get one first love. But there can be countless simp relationships. But I didn't want to be someone's simp anymore." I paused and continued, "Willow, stop wasting your time on me. Not everything in life has a second chance." Willow silently watched my back as I turned to leave. After a long while, she lowered her head and gave a bitter smile. Her laughter was laced with a faint sob. I didn't turn back, taking long strides away from her. From now on, dust to dust, ashes to ashes. If we meet again, we'll just be strangers.